In this tutorial, we'll be taking advantage of Lyra's system for context effects based on surface type, and we will set up different impacts depending on which surface type it is. And we will also boost up and modify the VFX for the dust for every time you step on the ground as the mannequin, and every time you land. And we'll be also going over the awesome goodies that animation modifiers are and how that will improve your workflow of setting up notifies for when the foot steps on the ground. We'll be going through the process of adding a new physical surface type for sand. Technically, it could be any surface for your game, up to 63, I think, Unreal supports. But essentially, we'll be setting up what decal would spawn on sand when your foot steps on it, what VFX plays, and also what meta sound plays when you step on sand. I'm finding that the way the context effects are setting up really helps you add a lot of immersion to your game based on the surface type you're shooting at or standing on. I wanted to add footstep VFX and sound effects into my game. And the first thing I try to do is to see if Lyra had anything already implemented, because I couldn't see it when I was playing out of the box. So I just went ahead and searched for footsteps and stumbled upon this blueprint, B footstep, and seemed to do different things based on which surface it was on. And then I searched where that is being referenced, and I found that it was the hero default. And then I'm going to press Control E to open that up. And then I was searching for the usages and saw that when it is using the interface function event anim motion effect, it was calling, it was essentially just adding this footstep actor to the player. So it just spawns it, and it spawns it to the mesh. It spawns it and already attaches it to the right foot, which is interesting. And then it also makes sure to attach the actor to the mesh component. In this case, it does not state a socket name. So in this case, I'm not sure which one wins. But essentially, we have this footstep that's attached to the player. And then if it's already valid, or after it's been created, it calls the anim motion effect on the footstep. So back to the footstep blueprint and to its anim motion effect implementation, I went ahead and searched for the anim motion effect. So it's a function that's implemented from an interface. So if we look at the class settings of the footstep, we can see that it implements the Lyra context effects interface, which seemed very promising for any effects based on some context, like a hit react, any context, like a hit result for a footstep. Yeah, so if I followed this over here, it had a bunch of information like the hit result, if there was a successful hit, and which bone. So let's say left or right foot. It had a bunch of checks just to make sure that everything's valid. And then if we kept going, depending on the surface type, in this case, it does the same path for every different surface type, but it saves the footstep surface type. And then we keep going. It spawns a Niagara system at this position. So the footprint is the footsteps. So there's a footsteps Niagara system, and then it sets a bunch of user variables on it, like the step location, the orientation of the footstep, the surface type, and the step side. I never personally noticed that there was a footstep in the game, and I found out that that's because there is a check. There's a check to make sure that you're not the server. And in my case, I'm making a single player experience, so I never noticed this. So I'm thinking that the intention might have been if you're not the dedicated server, because in all the other cases, it's neat to have a footprint or all the footprint VFX. So I'm just going to replace this with is dedicated server. Okay, and then delete that, compile and save. And this is the base class for all of our heroes. So I'm just going to minimize this. And I went ahead and opened up the shooter gym and let's play. And now you'll notice it's very faint, but there are footsteps all over the floor and they disappear after a certain time. So it's a good start for footstep systems, but we can't really see any dust or any sparks or anything. So I decided to go ahead and create a test map for so just to make sure that I can just focus on the footstep VFX and decals. So I went ahead and stopped the game and I'm gonna just close these ones. I found a good spot for my test map was in the Explorer plugin. So I'm just gonna go to all plugins and then Shooter Explorer. It's also where all the inventory stuff is and kind of like the exploration content that there is. Yeah, there's an interaction test map and an inventory test map. It uses an experience where there's no AI that spawn or anything. Let's go ahead and create a new level. So L underscore surface footsteps, or I guess we could just call it footstep test. And then when we open it up, there's really not much. And I personally like the map or the starter map in the, let's go to it in the shooter test content. And then under maps, there's a shooter test for fire weapon. I haven't personally tried any of these automated tests, or like it seems really interesting, so I might look into that. And I'm just gonna select the player start, the floor, the light source, and I think that's all I need. And then copy, edit, copy, or Control C. And then I'm gonna open my recent level, so footstep test. And I'm just gonna go ahead, click here, and then Control V for pasting. And then I'll click the player start and press F to center over it. Okay, so we have a super basic test map. And then when what we want to do first is we want to set up which experience this is. So I'm gonna go ahead and choose the test inventory experience. So it's definitely the most chillest experience because there's not much going on. So let's play. And I noticed that there was no footsteps right away, which was sad. So I stopped this and I just made sure that it was using the right pawn. So test inventory. So it uses the Hero Data Explorer. Let's see what that uses. And then the pawn class is Hero Explorer. So let's navigate to it and then Hero Explorer. And then the issue was that we weren't calling the parent of the anim motion effect. So I'm going to right click on this, add call to parent function, and it adds it underneath. And then we're going to just connect everything together. And there's got to be a nicer way to do that. Okay, and then compile, save. Okay, so now when we play, there's some very faint footsteps, but they're here. Okay, so this is the start of the tutorial where we will essentially just create our new surface type for sand, just to show how that is all set up, and we'll exaggerate all the footsteps VFX just to be able to see them and see what we can do with this. So we can go ahead and close all of this. And then let's navigate to our recent assets. And then I'm just going to go ahead and open our B footstep. So it's nice. I just noticed that there's this recent asset one. I don't know if it's new in 5.3 or if I've never noticed it, but it's super useful. Yeah, so our footstep if we go back over here, you can notice that there's this enum for physical surfaces. I will put a link for the documentation about physical surfaces, but essentially your materials can have a physical surface. We're going to go ahead and add our own surface type, so sand. I chose sand because I just recently watched Dune 2 and it's great, and yeah, it inspired me to just make this tutorial about sand. So yeah, back to the tutorial. So you can navigate to edit and then project settings. And then under engine, you will see the category for physics. And then if you scroll down, you'll notice that there's this section for physical surfaces. So essentially you could have 62 custom surface types for your project. So if your ground has grass, pebbles, all sorts of surfaces, the way Lyra has set up its context VFX, it means that you could define essentially what any sound or VFX that would trigger from footsteps or landing on that particular surface, which is really powerful. So we're going to go ahead and just create sand. And let's minimize this. You'll notice that when you right click and refresh this node, the sand will show up automatically, which is nice. So let's just go ahead and connect the sand here and save. So one thing that's interesting is to find out where these physical surfaces are defined. So let's see what physical surface this floor is actually using. So let's navigate to the details tab, and then let's just double click on the material instance, or sometimes you could just override the physics material here, but in this case it hasn't been overridden. So let's open up the material instance. Okay, and then let's go to the parent. And okay, so in this material, you'll notice that the physical material is PM underscore concrete. So let's go ahead and navigate to that. And here you go. Here's all your 3 physical materials so far. And those 3 correspond to the ones we saw in the editor settings. If I search for the reference viewer, you'll notice that a lot of materials in Lyra use the concrete one. And then the character is used by all the character mesh. So in in our case, I guess there's no concrete bolted holes in the characters when you shoot them. And then for the glass would have less dust. So there's a way to define those two differently. So we'll go ahead and create our own. So what I did is, or what we can do is, let's go ahead and just duplicate the concrete one. So right click duplicate or Control D. And then I'll call this one just PM underscore sand. Okay, and I'll save. All we have to change here is just to change the surface type to sand. We could play with all of these values like friction, and I think it affects the character movement, but I have some learning to do there. Okay, so now we have our physical material for sand. So there's a way now to tell our material that we want it to be sand. So I'm gonna go ahead and just duplicate this 3 more times. So Alt, click, and just move. So this one, I'll choose one of the glass ones. So this one looks okay. So MI glass A1. So that will be our glass physical material. Let's duplicate again. And then this one can be, I was searching for sand and all I found was this, I think it comes from the engine. So it's a landmass landscape. It doesn't have the physical material out of the box, but I'm essentially just gonna choose, I'm gonna override the physics material in the physics section, and then I'm gonna choose sand. Okay. And then our fourth one, let's just choose some arbitrary material just to show that it shouldn't have, or maybe it should have the default response. So I'm gonna choose just some basic material. I guess I'm gonna just choose some random material. So let's do cube 2. Okay, and let's go ahead and play. So there's some footsteps here. It's way harder to see it on the glass, or maybe it's actually not happening on the glass. And then on the sand, there's nothing yet because we haven't set that up. And on the blue, there is nothing either. So I'm just going to make sure that they're not stacked on top of each other. Okay, but now we have our test area. I was very curious to know where this event was actually being called. And it ends up it's being called in the code in an anim notify. Following the traces, I was curious to find exactly who or which anim montage were using that anim notify and how. So I searched for foot planting and I found this anim notify for foot plant. And then I searched for the reference viewer, went ahead and opened up one of these. So the pistol jog backwards, so Control E to open it up. Okay, so ends up that most or all of the animations that have the player have their foot planting at some point, they use this play context effects anim notify, and that one has all the information like the tag that we want to play. This is a footstep and we're walking, and it has properties, it has location offset, it has which socket name it is, and it performs a trace which then returns a hit result. So if I zoom in and I will pause, so right about this time is when the right foot is trying to essentially notify that an anim effect should be playing here. And then same over here with the left foot. And this was really interesting, and I was wondering at first, wow, this got to take a lot of time to hand place and everything. But another really nice tool that Lyra is using to generate these things are animation modifiers. So in our case, you can open up window and then animation data modifiers. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this. Let's just pretend that this is a new animation that you made or you imported, and there's some footstepping happening. And then we're going to apply all of these modifiers. Okay, and I'm just going to say apply to all, and then yes. And then it's not fully perfect, but it looks very similar to what we had before. And it essentially just creates the animation notifies at the right spot for whenever a foot is planting. So you don't have to hand place all of them. It's nice and easy to tweak them. So it's interesting that it shows land. So we might have to change that to just footstep. But I'm just going to go ahead and undo this just to see what we had before. Okay, so the foot sync are very different. So it's not exactly perfect, but it's really nice that there's some way to just auto-generate these notifies and then just tweak it unless it's what you want. It's nice because you don't have to specify the right foot, the left foot, and all that. So as you can see, it had auto-generated footstep land, but in our case, we wanted to have walk. The land one is good for landing animations, like after you jump. So maybe there's a way to modify these modifiers. But for now, this is a really good shortcut, and I didn't personally know about animation modifiers. So it should really help the workflow of authoring new animation sequences. So the way the logic happens is that this anim notify is hit in the animation, and then it starts a trace from the socket name. So in our case, the foot right. So I'm just gonna go navigate to that. So foot right. Okay, so it starts from the foot right socket name, and then it makes a trace of the channel visibility. The end location is just 50 centimeters low, so it essentially just traces a trace downward, and then sends the hit information over to the context effect component of the owning actor of this skeletal mesh. It has a few options as well, but these all seem pretty untouched. So the next part of this tutorial, we're going to look at how the VFX respond based on different surface type. Okay, so back into the footstep. Let's see where the VFX is spawned. Over here. So the footprint system is right over here. So let's double click on that. Okay, and you can see that there's the footprint decal right here. There's the sparks that happen mostly on glass. And then there's the footplant dust. They all have a warning on them. So first let's go ahead and just address these warnings. They might be a remnant of engine upgrades or whatnot. So let's just deal with them one by one. So the first warning is for the sparks. It just complains about essentially running the particle update on particle spawn incorrectly. So this one is nice. We can just press the fix issue button. And please correct me in the chat if I'm wrong on this, Niagara experts. And then it also complains about using a dynamic bounds mode. So all we can do is we can change our bounds to just fixed. And that looks good. And then save. And then we'll do the same thing for the dust effect. So the fix issue. And then let's just make sure that it's a fixed bounds. Compile and save. And then we'll notice that the footprint decal, those ones I don't have too many materials to show for examples, but essentially it uses, it sets up if it's a regular looking decal or if it's a decal for glass. And it took me a bit to figure these two out, like how are we using this renderer versus that renderer? It essentially comes down to the renderer visibility. So if we hover over that, it tells us that if a render visibility tag is present, particles whose tag matches this value will be visible in this renderer. So it's more like a mask of what's visible or not. So in our case, if it's the regular decal, it'll have this material. And there's also the debug nomen. I am not sure how to say that. And that one has the render visibility 0, but it is also off. And then if we go to our material to sub UV, you can see that the surface type to visibility tag mapping has 4 elements. And the third one, let's go ahead and open up our project settings to compare. So compare with the physics. Okay. So if we compare, so the surface type starts at default, then character, then concrete, then glass. So in our case, the only one that's showing a decal at visibility 1 is the glass. So if we compare it to the glass, it has the renderer visibility set to 1. So this is a neat trick to support different kind of enums and different materials per Niagara emitter. And that's right, the concrete is 0, so it just uses the regular one, which has the 0 visibility. So in our case, we want to show some footsteps, so we can add another entry into the surface type to visibility tag mapping, and that will be representative of our sand. So we're going to just use the regular decal. And then one that's interesting is that you can have a bunch of different emitters, but then to make sure you can mask out some surface types that you don't want something to happen, like let's say leaving a trace of water. If you have a water repellent surface somehow, you want it to look differently or not leave water traces, then you would essentially just turn this mask on that surface. So it also corresponds to the order of the physical surfaces. So in our case, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so if we don't want any decal, we would turn this on. So I'll turn it off for now. So now our footsteps should show up on the sand. Okay, they're very faint, but they are here. If I didn't want any footstep of any kind, then we would just go ahead and I'm just gonna close this. We return, I think it was index 4, so the mask on, so there's no footsteps. So yeah, there's no footsteps. Okay, I'll stop this because we do want that footstep. In our case, it'd be great to just add another decal specifically for sand, because sand displaces differently than other surfaces. So your footstep would look definitely different. Mud versus sand versus metal. Okay, so now for the more visual aspect of this. The dust is where I was mostly interested. So it was very hard to see the dust. So at first I thought it was maybe because it has the mask on. So the default, so that the concrete is masked off. So I'm just gonna play. So you can sort of see it on the edge, but it's very faint. It shows up when you jump, when you land. So I just made sure to really boost all of the particles. So the spawn per frame, I just doubled that to 10. And then, what else did I change? Initialize particle, I also changed it. I doubled it. I doubled it to 300. Okay, and then the sprite renderer, the puff smoke, I just made sure to have it more visible. So let's navigate to it, and then let's open it up. And I changed the alpha gain way higher. Okay, cool. So the puff of smoke is here. It's way more visible. I don't see any yellow here, so I'm just gonna stop this. Okay, so those are the values I ended up with. I tweaked it a little bit. Yeah, and then when we play the game, you can see that it ends up very gray. So I'm just gonna go ahead and stop that. And then the pyroFire, I'm gonna change it a little bit. It's really hard to select them. Okay, so I select this one, and I made it more of a peach-ish color. So I'll go ahead and delete this color here, and I'll choose something more creamy. So maybe like this. And then the rest will just be white. And there you go. Okay, and then I'll save. All right. And then when we play, let's see what that looks like. Oh my god. Okay, so that value might be way too much. I don't know why it's times 10. So that was probably why we had some emissive going on. But you can essentially just control exactly how your color happens. And I think it starts here and ends there. I might be wrong. Let's see. Okay, it might just be because our fire is at 9,000. So let's put it at maybe 10. Save. Play. And okay, that looks a little bit better. So the alpha gamma. Ah, that's the difference. Okay, so this is the value I was missing. Is it obvious I'm not a material artist? I gotta... this one's okay, actually. And let's just go back to the material instance and just push that value. Okay, yay! So at least now we can see our cloud. And it actually looks a lot like sand already. Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and duplicate this material instance. And we're gonna have it applied to all the other surfaces. Just to show how that would work and how customizable that VFX is. So I'm gonna stop this. And then I'm gonna navigate to it. And let's just duplicate this. And this one I'll call it maybe flipbook dust default. Okay, and in our case, we're just gonna also navigate to the pyro fire. We're gonna choose another one. So maybe the sparks one. Save. And then out in our Niagara system footsteps, let's add another. Let's pretty much copy what the decal has done. And I'll actually move this closer to it so we can see them both. Okay, and then I will rename this renderer to sand. And then I will duplicate this. So copy and then paste. And then this one I will rename to default. Okay, so our sand is using the renderer visibility 0, so that index. And then our default. Let's make it use, or let's do the opposite. Let's make the sand use 1 and the default use 0. And then I think it's possible to reorder. Yeah, let's move that down. Compile and save. And let's go ahead and duplicate this material to sub UV scratchpad script, just because it already exists and it does the logic we want it to do. So let's just copy, and then in your particle spawn, right click, paste. Okay, and then I'm gonna move this up to under initialize particle. Okay, and then our surface type to visibility tag mapping, our number 4 is our sand, so 1, and then everything else will be 0. Okay, so we could have as many different materials for the dust that we want. And we could also, what we can do is we can mask some out. So in my case, I will make sure that the glass doesn't have any. Okay, so it's a little hard to see the difference. Or actually, there is no difference right now because we haven't chosen it yet. So in our case, so I'm going to choose the new one we just created. So one of them is more red, the other one's more white. I'm gonna use, so this one for the sand. Yeah, it is more red. And then the default, this one. Okay, and let's see that. Okay, nice. So again, it's a little hard to see, but the sand one is definitely more red, and this one is more white. So you can see them side by side. Sweet. Okay, so now we have a way to set which material, which VFX spawns for each footsteps and on land. And then now I'll just show how to essentially just make sure that some surface does not spawn any dust. So for that, you can go ahead and click on the surface type, spawn mask, and then the one that corresponds to the glass, we will turn that on for the mask. Okay, so I always need to double, triple check this. So project settings, physics, and then the glass is 0, 1, 2, 3. I will turn the glass off. Okay, and then when we play, this should mean that the glass doesn't do anything to do with dust. Okay, so the next part of this video will just cover how to specify sounds for footsteps. So that is also already set up in Lyra. We'll just be adding our own values for the sand footstep sounds. Go ahead and open my recent asset. And let's just go ahead and open our hero default. And then for the sounds, I noticed that the Lyra context effect in the details panel, it has a default context effects libraries. And if you open that up, you'll notice that for each context, for the effect tag, anim effect, footstep walk, there's the context for concrete, and then there's the meta sound to play for that concrete. There's also specified meta sounds for the player landing. So what we can do is we can add our own surface type for sand. And at first I thought I would just need to add the context. But there's an extra step we need to do to make sure that the surface maps with these tags here. And that is to go to Edit, Project Settings, and then under your game category, there's the Lyra context effects. And this is where your surface type to the tag is set up. So I found that out through the code. So there's no way in Blueprint to exactly know. And an interesting thing to do is that I can just, if I try to add something, it will try to add the default one. So I need to swap the sand to it and then add the default. So I'm just going to swap these ones. So copy and then paste. And then for the sand one, I'm just going to clear the tag. And then I'm going to go ahead and just add another surface type. So I'm just going to hover over it just to know. I mean, sometimes it would be nice to be able to just hover over it and know. Oh, interestingly enough, these tags are set up in the data table surface types. So I'm going to go ahead and find that. So I'm just going to close that, undo what I just did. And then I'll just hover over it again just to know. DT surface types. Okay, so DT underscore surface type. Oh, sweet. Okay, so this is our gameplay tag table row. I'm just going to go ahead and add a row. So I'm just going to click add. So I'm just going to rename this to sand. I'm just going to add the tag surface type dot sand. Okay, so this is this is the way of adding a gameplay tag that I was not aware of before just now. So that's cool. Okay, so now if I go to my Lyra context effect, it still hasn't updated. Interesting. So it probably means that I just need to add it. I still need to do the same thing. So sand, default. But in this case, at least this tag should be, I should have access to it. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this, paste. And then for sand, I'm going to search for sand. And there you go. It was created in the data table surface types. So I'm just going to click that. Okay, sweet. So now we have our magic of syncing up a surface type which should match up with our physics setting. So sand is matched up to the surface type sand. Okay, so whenever that plays, it'll know what to search for. So let's go ahead and add a context effect entry. And I will just minimize all the other ones just to be able to see what I'm doing. And I will just drag this up here. Okay, and I'm going to copy this one over. And in our context, we want the sand. Okay, and I don't particularly have a meta sound for sand. If you do, go ahead and use that one. But I'm just going to use the concrete sound. So I'm just going to add this and then paste it. Okay, and then same thing goes for the landing. So let's stick the landing. And okay, I'm just going to copy this, paste, and I'm just going to choose the sand. So when we're landing or this notifies hit, then we're going to just play this meta sound. Oh. Okay. So this is our context effect, default skin. There's probably ways, or you can definitely define this in the child classes of your players. So let's say you probably want a different meta sound to play based on if you have a super light character on its feet like Legolas versus someone chunky like Roadhog. So this is a way you can really define, and it's really nice how you can set this all up, and there's already a nice setup for context, VFX, or sound effects. So I'm just gonna put the sound on for this segment. Okay, so this is the sound for the concrete meta sound. Then the glass one is very different. And then we're back to the concrete sound, so it doesn't sound right. We should probably get some sounds for sand. The next bit of this tutorial is I want to define the hit impact of whenever we shoot the sand. So for the bullet impact, it was kind of the same situation where I just search for weapon impacts. I forget how I got there. I think I started from the weapon and then just checked how the weapon impacts happens. So let's go ahead and open that blueprint. And it's safe to close all the other ones. So the sound, the hero, the footsteps. So the weapon impact, it has a lot of variables. It essentially just calls the fire event, and then that one ends up spawning a VFX. So way over here. So the current system template, I'm just gonna find the references, and then it's set way over there, and it's set on which current impact surface has been hit. And it's nice because it takes into account that some of the bullets might have hit some different surface, and it will spawn the right decal for that. So I'm going to go ahead and just refresh the select node so that it also has our sand. In my case, I don't have any special VFX for the sand. So we're just going to go ahead and use the concrete one because it's the closest one. And this can also show how we can sort of reuse the same VFX, but have differences within the same Niagara system or emitter. So I'm going to go ahead and open the concrete VFX. Okay, so the concrete VFX is definitely more complicated than the footstep one. And in this case, I will not go ahead and fix all of these. I'm mostly just interested in the decal. I took a wrong step, so that one was more about the weapon impacts. So those are the VFX that happen when you hit a surface. So those are pretty much all the particles that are thrown. The one I personally care about at the moment is the weapon decals. So it's still good to know about the weapon impacts. But for the weapon decals, let's go ahead and open that up. So this one, it uses just one Niagara system for all types of, what's it called? Surface types. So it already accounts for if it's glass or regular. So you can see when you shoot glass, it has a different, impact decal. Okay, so in our case, we just want to use that same one for our sand. So since we just did the step of using the same as concrete, we already have some sort of impact VFX going on. But now we're just going to make sure that we also get a decal. Okay, so to do that, what you can do is we do like the regular. So the regular uses the renderer visibility 2, and the glass uses 3. So let's go ahead and see the material to sub UV. So the surface type to visibility tag mapping, we want to use 3 for our sand. So let's go ahead and add an element to our array, and then we'll use 3 as well. Or I think it was 2. Okay, I will use 2. So this one should use the concrete decal. Okay, so when we play, we shoot, and there you go. We have the concrete decal. So if we ever wanted a specific decal for our sand, we would define it in this render as a different material instance, and then we would use a different renderer visibility index. So at first I thought that meant is it visible or not, but it actually uses it kind of like an index. Another neat thing that is a good example from Lyra is that their array for specifying, I guess, behavior of the impact decal of the gunshots per surface, they also have the size of the decal. So you can really specify anything based on the surface type. And in this case, we could have we could have some decals that are massive. I'm not sure if it'll clip or something, but if I play now and I shoot, there you go. So you have these massive decal. But yeah, just to show how customizable Niagara is, and this system that the Lyra team have put up for context effects based on surface type. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and bump up these values so that it's more obvious what's going on. So I will go to our recent asset, the footsteps. Okay, so our default one, I'll just make sure that it's more blue so it's more visible, the difference. So I'm just gonna click that. And then this power fire, I'll just make sure that it's very blue. Okay. So, oh, that's right. A neat thing is that since the color of the cloud is using a color curve, you can change it during runtime and you can see the update right away. Yeah, this tutorial was just another example of all the good stuff that the devs have packed into this Lyra sample game. As always, thank you for watching and see you in the next one.